David Alter, Maple Leafs reporter at Sports Illustrated, and the hockey news was at the Maple Leafs golf tournament yesterday. How's your game, David? Are you more like a spectator and getting some TikTok content?
Well, definitely more of a spectator, Ailish. Unfortunately, when we're there, it's just like talk to the players and, they go play and we go work. So it's not as much fun for us, unfortunately.
Okay, so whose game was the best, and did the Maple Leafs unlock a new TikTok generation with Matthew Nyes coming in? Because I saw so much content that they really hadn't, endeavored into previously in season. So maybe they've got a little bit more Gen Z in them.
Yeah, you know what? It's probably a lot to do with that partnership they've got as well, too, right? Like the helmets and everything like that. I remember seeing, the big TikTok game last year for the Maple Leafs was just getting them as they came off the ice and just asking them questions like, would you rather do this or that, or what's your favorite food, or whatever the case may be. And now it's like, okay, take whatever trend is going and get the players involved in that. And so, with their TikTok partnership, I'm sure they're getting all kinds of crazy access that we would like to know about in the social media age. But it's certainly, we all saw it. It looked like a lot of fun. There's a part of me that also can't wait for this to get serious too and see what this team is all about.
Yeah, I guess big helmet sponsor, bigger responsibilities, I suppose. Like, I think the Lightning had like a printing service on their helmets. Like, I don't think I think they're less things attached to it than having TikTok on the helmet. But that's the reality of playing for the Toronto Maple Leafs. One of the other realities is that things are going to be pretty interesting at a media day when everyone gets to converse again. There are going to be some storylines that are taken a little bit too far. There are going to be things that are talked about maybe ad nauseum. But we were going over it a little bit earlier in the 6 a.m. hour. Like, I don't know if it's the newsiest start to a Leaf season that we've seen. I mean, the Nylander story is big, and the Nylander story will be dealt with, but I'm not sure there's any other massive, massive points of intrigue to start this Leaf season before we actually see anything play out. So for you, the biggest non-Nylander story for Media Day is what, David?
Yeah, I think the biggest story for me, non-Nylander, is going to be how do the new guys fit into everything. I mean, the one big difference with Brad Treliving compared to Kyle Dubas, and perhaps maybe why things weren't so crazy news-wise going into it, is because the summer has been so newsworthy with the Auston Matthews extension and everything else. But I think you have to kind of look at, okay, Brad Treliving brought in guys that, unlike maybe in the past, you know exactly what the role is supposed to be. You're expecting Tyler Bertuzzi to play in the top six, likely with Matthews and Marner, but he didn't confirm that. I'm really curious to kind of see if that is, in fact, his go-to position to start the season. With Max Domi, I'm curious to see, he's played all different kind of positions, but is he actually going to play on the wing, or is he going to be in the top six, or is he going to be in the top nine? So there's that. I'm really curious to see how Matthew Nyes does in the regular season. He was thrown into a crazy situation playing the final 3 games of the regular season and then performing really well in the playoffs. But does he have a bit of a sophomore slump as the season ramps up, because it usually starts more free-flowing and offensive as opposed to the middle of the ice and trying to play hard and physical in a physical game that the playoffs usually bring. So I'm curious to see how he does in a full season as well. There's just so many things. But with the Nylander stuff still kind of open, that's maybe the biggest story. But the Auston Matthews extension being locked up when it was, I think, kind of cooled a lot of the anticipation of what is up with this team in the future, because I think that was such a big piece to solve.
Yeah, it'll definitely help the situation surrounding Matthews, right? Like, I remember last year, there's a lot of intrigue waiting for him to come out. I don't even know. I don't know if he was with his agent, but he was with someone coming out. Like, there was a lot of security around just like the messaging that day from Auston Matthews, because it was a semi-big moment to start the year, even though we were so far away from him even being able to negotiate anything. But it feels like the situation will be different for Matthews this year, right? Like, maybe free of any drama, free of any constraints, free of like walls being put up by either the fan base or him or by the coaching staff or whatever. He's a Maple Leaf for the foreseeable future, and he did so in a way that is, I think, palatable for everyone. So do you expect the vibe to be any different around Auston Matthews this year, at least compared to the start of last year?
I think the vibe will be different, but I think at some point as the season moves along, if the production isn't better than what it was last year, not saying he was bad last year, but if he doesn't get closer to what he did in 21-22, I think people will start to wonder a little bit in terms of his health and some of those other factors, just because, he didn't look quite 100% last season. So I think a lot of the big questions are going to be, is whatever you were dealing with last year fully behind you, that you can put up more goals this year than you did? Not to say he didn't put up a lot of goals last year, but 60 was something else, and somewhere in the 50s would probably be the expectation for someone like Auston Matthews. So I think you look at that, you look at, can he take his game to another level? Can he push the team to different results than they've got? They got that first round win finally, but the way it ended in 5 games left a sour taste in a lot of Leaf fans' mouths. So there's going to be a lot there that he's going to have to try and prove from a personal and team standpoint to kind of really bring his game to that next level.
Chatting with David Alter. Tomorrow the Maple Leafs have their media day to kick off this upcoming season. So you get an opportunity to talk to the players, but as a player myself, sometimes we say the same generic answer. So you might get something more from Sheldon Keefe or Brad Treliving. Is there a big question that you want to address? Is it about the goalie tandem? Is it about the off-season signings? How they're going to approach this season in terms of their defenseman lineup? Is there something that, perks your interest most if you get an opportunity to talk to some of the guys in charge?
Yeah, so the defense question is still one for me. I mean, when I was trying to project what this defense was going to look like going into the season, they added John Klingberg, they've added some other bit players there, but the core is more or less the same. But then when you try to project defense pairs, it's not quite clear. It doesn't quite make a lot of sense as to who should go with where. There was a lot of debate over on our side with the staff as to where you kind of put these guys. And so because of that, I still feel like there's still going to be a lot of shuffling there, but could there be another change? Does an injury in training camp allow for some cap maneuvering to maybe remake the deal a little bit and make some sort of change? Because everything else was kind of addressed. John Klingberg is an offensive defenseman they really haven't had in a little while, but there are some issues defensively, which he's admitted. But then after that, what does this defense pair look like? Is it good enough? And so I'm curious about that. The goaltending tandem, not so much, just because Samsonov is kind of there as your guy to start Joseph Wall. Everyone's going to wonder if he's actually made enough of a step, or if Martin Jones is going to get some games, and can they keep him with the waiver situation, because third goalies get snapped up like crazy. So there's that. Offensively, I think there's really no question about the Leafs in terms of what they brought. It's just that the new guys can kind of get in there. But now I'm curious to see how Brad Treliving conducts his business. He's only been around for a few months. He said that it was like working through, it was like drinking out of a fire hose, trying to get this whole team set up. And now I actually want to see what he's like on a day-to-day basis around the team, because it's one thing to make these moves and kind of learn everything on the fly in an off season, but you don't really know until you're actually around the guys on a daily basis, the whole team, what your 23 guys are in that regard. And then the changes that happen there. I'm curious to see what he does and how he conducts his business as the team goes along and as things go. And one more thing, I'm curious to see how Sheldon Keefe does coach, if it changes, if it's the same, or if there are any things that are different with Kyle Dubas not around.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about Sheldon Keefe next. In a world where he's detached from Dubas is an interesting one. I mean, he was given the 2-year extension. He's got a lot of financial security here. It looked like someone who was kind of just like being kept at an arm's reach initially by Treliving and Shanahan, but now the investment is there. I mean, he should be feeling pretty comfortable, which is not how he felt, I would imagine, to start the summer. You expect anything different from him?
Maybe a little bit. I am curious. The big difference is Brendan Shanahan is still there, and he is really the de facto in terms of how the team operates, in terms of conduct, in terms of a lot of those things. But it might be a little different because as you might have seen from that Amazon Prime thing or whatever the case may be, he does like to go to council and bounce things off people. And not having Kyle Dubas there, I think, will have some sort of effect where maybe there's going to be times where he might have to go more on gut feel on certain things than just changing things up or grabbing the opinion of the general manager. He might still do that in Brad Treliving, and Treliving might give a completely different answer or opinion. So there's going to be those things. But, there are things like, I remember when he'd rip into the team early in the season, and Sheldon Keefe can be a pretty emotional guy after a loss at times, to his own admission. And I'm curious to see if that continues, remains, or if it's different, or if the response is different with a different voice as his primary boss. So there are going to be some things. I mean, at the professional level, he just has not been a head coach without Kyle Dubas around, and I'm curious to see what, if any, effect that has.
Yeah, does he feel the need to walk back any comments in a world where Dubas is not around? I'm not sure Dubas was the guy that was instrumental or maybe encouraged that. In fact, I would suggest it wasn't him, but we'll see. We'll learn a few things now that Kyle isn't in the fold, because I'm sure things will operate slightly different, at least. Brad Treliving's summer was interesting in that nothing really changed. It wasn't this massive stamp. It wasn't this massive overhaul. Clearly he wanted to do some things to add some grit and some toughness and to change the dynamic around the Stars, but the Stars remain, and really the DNA of this team is about the same. When you look at what Treliving did and maybe what your expectations were before he started putting his touches on the team, anything surprise you? Anything not add up? Anything stand out in terms of what he did and maybe what you expected to happen with the Leafs and with Treliving?
For the most part, I think this kind of went according to script. I mean, when he came in, he addressed the number one priority as Auston Matthews, and it took him until August 23rd for it to happen, but he got that done. The Sheldon Keefe stuff didn't surprise me at all. It usually, when a general manager comes in, especially in these circumstances too, where Kyle Dubas his contract was just not renewed, and it wasn't necessarily results based, and there were other factors into it. You looked into that. He came into a situation where it made no sense for him to make any sort of drastic changes. You go in as a general manager, you have a tenure, you usually have some bullets to fire. A head coach is one of those bullets to fire, and you can do that later and make that change later, or you can wait. And usually almost every general manager waits in that situation. So regardless of a lot of those things, any major changes, I think he just kind of had to see the team for himself and not be away from it to kind of know what works and what doesn't work. So I think you'll see more of, not drastic from a core standpoint, but maybe more of a real feel difference when he takes over in a regular season situation and has to make any sort of mid-season change. But apart from everything else, this went according to how I think you would expect it to go for someone who is experienced yet has not worked in this particular market and is inheriting a good team that just hasn't pushed itself to a different level and has all the pieces there. So to come in and make any sort of massive core change probably would have put so much heat on him so early that was probably unnecessary, because zero heat is on him right now, given the circumstances. So this went about where you'd expect. I do still think like there's going to be some sort of major change on D at some point. I just don't know when it's going to happen. And I think that will be the real testament to what Brad Treliving brings to this team.
We're chatting to David Alter, Maple Leafs reporter at Sports Illustrated and the Hockey News. So yesterday was the golf tournament, and Ryan Reeves made a little bit of social media buzz, asked about Radko Gudas, who celebrated in the face of Joseph Woll, young Joseph Woll, and said, well, I hope he tries that. Now, I know he's playing up to the media, and everybody already likes what he's bringing in terms of his intensity, but I wonder what you think of his actual role, either on the ice. We know what it would be in the locker room, but how you're perceiving what Ryan Reeves thinks his role will be and where he might fit with this Maple Leafs lineup?
Yeah, it's a great question, Ailish. Like, I'm trying to figure that out as well because, I mean, there's the contract, which came in with 3 years. There's the fact that he's 36. He's going into his 14th season in the NHL. The game evolves in the regular season, especially early on. It's all speed and skill.
Mm-hmm.
You have to wonder, is he going to be an everyday player, or is he just going to get some spot duty, and then is it just going to be opponents based, or is it one of those things where as the games get more intense, you put him in more, but then is that good for the player that he's going in and out of the lineup? It's going to be interesting to see because there is the cash commitment, which is not that big a deal if you look at some of the ways you can bury cap hits, but it's more so, is he taking a spot where someone else in that fourth line or wherever he plays is being a detriment to the Toronto Maple Leafs? In the early part, I don't see it, but I do think there was a good reason for him to be brought in. You can see from the personality. You can see that he called himself a loud guy who doesn't take time getting to know his teammates. He'll quickly chirp them and get them out of their comfort zone and wants to bring that different element in there. And, you know, the Leafs really haven't had that kind of personality in the room. They've had some, but not quite like that. And so I'm curious to see if what he does is good enough. It's really going to come down to his play on the ice. If he can't justify his spot in regular situations, they're not just going to throw him in just to get 2 to 5 minutes. Like, I think those days are gone. Like, in the height of Ryan Reeves' play, he can perform. Like, I remember 2 seasons ago, he scored twice against the Maple Leafs in that game against the Rangers, which brought on Sheldon Keefe's soft and purposeless comments. So like, there are still times where he could be dangerous on the ice, but he's going to have to show that consistently in order for him to justify his everyday presence, because I don't think just being that guy who's going to intimidate players is just good enough in today's NHL.
Yeah, if the problem was a quiet room, I mean, he doesn't have to cost anything on the cap to be in the room, technically. So we'll see how this situation plays out. But the circumstances which brought him here were interesting when we unpack that initial signing, and we'll see how he settles into the room and settles into his role. They are over the cap by almost $3 million, and I'm of the mind that you generally never have to worry about that. But should the Leafs be concerned, or Leaf fans be concerned at all, that they're about $3 million over the cap as we speak?
No, I really don't think so. I mean, at the end of the day, when they get to it, if the worst case scenario is they only have a 20-player roster, they'll do that. They were prepared to do that, and they did do that last season before Jake Muzzin's injury, and that opened up roster spaces with LTI. So that would likely happen again in this situation where they would just start with 20. But in the years past, you've got 3 weeks of hockey, you've got 7 preseason games, and a lot can happen, and you don't have to be cap compliant until the day before the season. And it just takes one mid-range injury that is longer than a couple of weeks in order for them to not really have that be an issue anymore. So the thing with the cap there, and I always try and explain it, is they're not over the cap until they have to be under the cap, and that's the day before the regular season starts. And so a lot can happen, and there's just going to be so many guys that are going to play between now and then that I would be shocked if there wasn't an injury. It'd be good for them, but worst case scenario, they just start with 20 guys on the roster instead of 23.
We know the storyline over the last couple days and week was Mike Babcock. Do you think that anyone will be asked about Mike Babcock, his relationship with the players, or has that ship sailed? And looking forward, if you're a Columbus Blue Jackets or a Maple Leafs fan.
Yeah, he might get a question, but I think the fact that he's gone now and it's a couple days, that I think it's probably the ship has sailed on that one. Had he had still been around, like I remember when Mike Babcock was hired on July 1st and the reports before that, I was already starting to circle the games that the Leafs had against the Jackets, because those were going to be very highly anticipated. And now they're not. But yeah, it's interesting just to see how how that kind of unfolded. And really just goes to show you that maybe there is a transitional shift in terms of what is acceptable and what isn't acceptable in terms of coaching methods that used to be before and are now. And there is just no room for error in those type of situations. And if you make a mistake once, you have to show that you're ready to never do it again. And that's clearly not what happened in this situation.
Well, you might have had those games circled, but at least you didn't have a futures bet on a Jack Adams winner like one of these two co-hosts on the radio
I have
show
a Hall
right
of
now.
Fame bad bet. Hall of Fame.
Might have been the worst
He
thing
never
ever
won it
done.
before, too.
Well,
he was finalist in his first season with the Maple Leafs, too.
Well, he hit all the boxes, right?
Justin
like good
thought.
narrative,
Second
support from media members, maybe no longer any support, opportunity to turn around a team.
Dead
I thought it was an
money.
okay bet, but it will go in the graveyard
get
as one of the worst
refunded.
of all time.
I assume
will
you
not be refunded for that. No way.
Maybe you will. Maybe you will.
Maybe.
They refunded the Aaron Rodgers props. So if they do that, and he played. So
yeah, this is just my grievous error, though.
Well, if we start talking about it now, some book will hear, and they'll try to help you out there, Justin. Well, David, thanks for jumping on this morning. Enjoy tomorrow's media day and the start of another season ahead.
Yeah, you got it. Thanks so much for having me on.